I will leave the sharing from Julia, and there, like, if you can share, follow me on the board here on our Miro board. I wanted to guide you through a picture of the Scrum framework, actually. Maybe, Julia, you're still presenting. Maybe you can. Yes, I will
I
present
did.
now. Thank you, and you'll come to me. So,
Yes, I just got the hint from our
yeah,
regie that it
yeah.
might be the case that the recordings and the
Oh,
stream is not ready yet.
oh, okay.
So maybe
Maybe.
we start at 9 and you have now the option to verbally share some impressions from yesterday.
Okay,
Sorry
yeah.
for this hiccup going forth and back, but I think it's a good idea to to wait until 9 because people might join this time the stream.
So yesterday there was also a session, or there was a day full of sessions, or?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yesterday we had the first day of our 2 days bar camp, and we had 2 session rounds, also 7 sessions each, but would be more interesting from our participants to hear and listen to your impressions. Maybe you want to share something with us.
And you as in me, or or someone else that joined yesterday, or?
It's hard for you to share, Barry.
Yeah, I was already wondering, like, well, I can talk about my day yesterday, but it's
No, I meant our participants.
I see some faces, at least, that have been here yesterday, but not all.
But one thing, I can share something from yesterday. What I kept in mind was when Trisha talked about the exercise she did with her daughters, I guess, giving compliments, and I thought that would not work out with my sons. But maybe I should leave the comfort zone and give it a try next time we are together watching soccer, switch off the TV, and do a little exercise with them. And I will keep you posted what happened.
Okay. Thanks. Anyone else wants to share something? Dirk, you raised your hand.
Yeah. Well, I'll just go ahead and give it a try. I was actually very inspired by Trisha Broderick, who did yesterday's keynote. She is so energetic and so enthusiastic about the things that she talks about. I mean, that was really inspiring. And then following that, there's so many interesting sessions also today where I personally would like to split up in 5 persons to be able to attend all of them. But that's just from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk. Okay, looking at the clock, we can start. I just got the message the stream is running. So, yeah, we're happy to have Barry here with us. He's helping companies to overcome outdated work models, and he's co-founder of a company called The Liberators. I think that has something to do with his T-shirt, I guess.
Yeah, yep.
And he will use
It's not like team leader, what it stands for.
yeah. Perfect. And he will use the next 45 minutes to get zombies and Scrum into one talk. So we are really curious how this is going to work out. And before I forget, we will collect questions again, like yesterday, in Slido. The link is already on the Miro board, and it will be pasted here in the chat in a couple of seconds again, I guess. So if you have questions to ask Barry at the end, feel free to enter them here, and you can also upvote questions if you find them very valuable. And that's it from my side. Over to Barry.
Cool. Thanks for the introduction, Sven. And just from my understanding, I've got until 10, right? 10 o'clock. Just from a time boxing perspective.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. So what I could probably do is that I'm gonna give you also opportunities to ask questions in between.
Okay.
So not like a waterfall phase of questions in the end, but more use an iterative and incremental approach to give you opportunities to ask questions. And we can use Slido, we can use the chat sometimes. We're just going to play with this a bit as well.
Exactly. We'll have an eye on that. We planned to start with the Q&A at 9:45, but if you have breaks in between where it makes perfect sense, we can just do it that way.
Perfect.
And we'll have an eye on that as the moderators.
So just checking. I think I'm sharing my screen right now, correct? And I'm gonna make a slideshow. Perfect.
Yeah, perfect.
So, topic for today, how to prevent or fix zombie Scrum. So we're going to talk about professional Scrum, about zombie Scrum itself, and also a bit more generic about how it ties in into Agile and how it also ties in into the research that we're doing. That is Johannes Schartau, our friend from Germany, from Hamburg. That's the person with the red beard on the right side. Christian Verwijs, my colleague, also co-founder of the Liberators, the guy with the curly hair. And I'm the guy on the left, although in reality I'm not that bald, but maybe it's some explosion misfired, could be. This could be a good starting point. So if you haven't done so already, maybe grab your notebook, just a piece of paper and something to write with on that piece of paper. We might do something with it at the end of the presentation if there's still time left. I'm going to explain, well, my and also Johannes and Christian's Scrum journey in roughly about 1 minute. So you also know a bit more about me. I started working in IT at the start of 2000, mostly in a bit more technical roles. Then I got promoted to a role of a project manager and fulfilled those roles for roughly about 10 years. I think it was around 2010 that I discovered Scrum. I promoted myself to the role of a Scrum Master, started doing lots of experiments in a web agency where I worked at that moment. That's a company where I worked for about 5 years and tried to do Scrum in, well, all different ways, working with customers, doing software development. Then I got connected to Scrum.org as a trainer, launched the Liberators together with Christian Verwijs. Chris and I developed the Professional Scrum Master 2 class, which is now a class of Scrum.org. Johannes introduced us to Liberating Structures. And also at that point in time, we started to connect our work doing Scrum with Liberating Structures, because we see a very strong benefit if you start using Liberating Structures in the context of Scrum as well. Maybe I can talk a bit more about that later. As a hobby project, Christian built the Zombie Scrum Survey about 5 years ago. That proved to be quite popular, and all the data that we got from the survey, because a lot of teams took the survey, that data was used as input for writing the book, The Zombie Scrum Survival Guide, which we also wrote together with Johannes. If we move forward in time, then Chris and I used Corona, because Corona sort of like evaporated all the activities that we've had in our calendar. So we had lots of time, and we decided to do some academic research, well, mostly Christian. And he wrote a paper together with Daniel Russo from the University of Aalborg in Denmark about Scrum team effectiveness. We also decided to completely change the Zombie Scrum survey into the Scrum team survey, and by now we actually made it a more agnostic survey. So we have the option to take the Scrum version, but you can also take the agnostic Agile version. And product development combined with training and workshops, and also developing a lot of content like blog posts, card exercises, maybe also new classes and workshops. That's our focus nowadays. So that's me in, well, I'm not sure if this was 1 minute, but let's make it 1 minute-ish. And so you know a bit more about me. The first chunk of this presentation is going to be about Zombie Scrum. And like already said, these are the 3 authors: Christian Verwijs, Johannes Schartau, and myself. Zombie Scrum Survival Guide, A Journey to Recovery. And in this illustration, we have visualized some symptoms of Zombie Scrum. And what I would like you to do is to give you about, well, maybe 10, 20 seconds to see if you can spot any of the symptoms. And if you can spot a symptom, just write it in the chat. And this gives me an opportunity to see if I can also see the chat while I'm displaying full screen. And I can. Excellent. See if I can make it a bit bigger. One developer dead. No sprint goal. Yeah, sprint goal. Yeah, too much work. Nothing gets done. Nice. There are more. No collaboration. That's a good one. Spiderweb. Yep, on the retrospective boards. People are not really working together. Oh, it's going fast right now. No stakeholder. Yes, that was one that I was looking for. Maybe one developer is even more effective. He's green. Always a good sign. Okay, I'm going to close the chat. Nothing in done. Nice. Well, I think you've already captured the essence of Zombie Scrum symptoms. So in a nutshell, Zombie Scrum is all about not having a clear goal. It could be like a product goal, it could be like a sprint goal. It's just doing work from the product backlog, and it seems to be never ending, but there's not really like this end state or this goal towards you're focusing on. There's also no done software, so there's nothing to show to the stakeholders. And in many cases, well, or they forgot to invite the stakeholders, or they don't have any idea who their stakeholders are. There's also not a cycle of continuous improvement going on. There's no real collaboration going on. Maybe a long time ago, someone achieved a Scrum certificate, but the Spiderweb, well, indicates that it's not really actively used. And like you also already noticed, there's not really like a collaboration going on between the team, between maybe the other roles around like Scrum Master and Product Owner. They're just focused on doing as much work as possible, but there's no focus on continuously improving on the done increment and on collaborating with your stakeholders. This is just well, some of the symptoms that we see happening in teams that are stuck with Zombie Scrum. Now, if we move further, then I'm going to share 11 causes of Zombie Scrum that we've encountered over the years. This is not the full list of causes, but this is more like, well, if I had to pick 11, then these would be my 11 causes. One of them is that in organizations that we see struggling with Zombie Scrum, we often notice that there's a gap between business and IT. Meaning, and actually we have got one client in the Netherlands and they literally have 2 buildings. And it's actually like this: in one building, they've got the business, and the business, those are the people, well, they consider themselves stakeholders, not really, but they consider themselves stakeholders, thinking of all the things that their software development team should build. They make all the plans in the business building, and then they hand over the contract requirements with the deadline, the planning, the cost, over to the IT department, and then it's up to the IT department to build it. But there's not really like a good collaboration going on between business and IT. They don't really speak to each other that often. They mostly talk via status updates and big reports that are being shared between the various departments. So gap between business and IT is one of the causes of Zombie Scrum that we've seen happen in organizations quite a lot. Another one is that when we ask teams, so why are you using Scrum, or even Kanban or Agile in general, then the motivation or the reasoning for getting started is quite questionable. Sometimes teams got pictured this doomsday scenario that if they would not start using Scrum, then they would not survive as a team or as a company. Sometimes a manager just heard from a different company that they were doing Scrum, and that seemed to be a good reason to also start doing Scrum, the fear of missing out. Sometimes people read books or blog posts with spectacular product promises about increases of productivity, There's actually a book about it with something in the title about promising doubling the amount of work in half the time. And well, who doesn't want it? So that's a reason to start using Scrum. Or they simply hired an Agile coach and that Agile coach taught them to do Scrum. So that's these are not like the best motivations to start using Scrum. So this is another cause. I think I've got about 9 to go. Output versus outcome. Another cause is that they don't focus really on the outcome that they achieve as a team, but mostly on velocity, mostly on how much work is a team producing. And then the illusion is that the more work a team does, the better they are doing. Well, actually, of course, they could be focusing on building the wrong stuff, and then it's pretty meaningless. So output versus outcome. There's only an Agile transformation or a Scrum adoption, give it a name, in theory. So the assumption is if we only send everyone to an expensive training, and just to be clear, I'm also one of those expensive trainers, so I'm shooting myself in the foot bit maybe with this one. But if we only send everyone to an expensive training, give everyone a certificate, then we have transformed as an organization. Well, an actual transformation, of course, is not about giving everyone a certificate, but really about changing deeply ingrained, beliefs and the mindsets of people. And that's way more difficult. And then to be clear, just to not fully make myself redundant, a training can be useful, but training itself is not enough. It might be a good starting point, but it's definitely not enough to transform or to fully change an organization. Another cause is that there's way too much distance between the team and the customer. And that's quite surprising, something that we already discovered recently, is that many teams don't even know who their customers or stakeholders are. But if they know who their stakeholders or customers are, then there's way too much distance. I recently spoke to a company in which they actually did not want the developers to talk directly with their customers, because their assumption was that would only harm the developers and the customer as well, because they would not understand each other. So they always have these other people in departments in between, and they sort of like transfer the knowledge from and the knowledge and the questions and ideas from the developers to the customers. So too much distance between team and the stakeholders or the customers. Gold plating. So just if we only add this more feature, then we will release. And gold plating also results in big bang releases. So gold plating and big bang releases are strongly together with each other. The big problem with gold plating and big bang releases is that it increases risk. And risk on building the wrong product, risk on building features that are not actually necessary. And as such, you don't validate your assumptions early and often. I'm going to talk about this picture and actually more about risk and assumptions at a later moment in this presentation. I'm, by the way, noticing that I'm going quite fast. So if I'm going too fast, let me know. I am going to hit the pause button once I'm done with the causes, just so you know. Another cause is huge sprint backlog items, and therefore it's quite difficult to move items to done, because if you have a 2-week sprint, teams are often already like maybe for 10 days busy with one item, and then finally on the last day, if it's possible at all, they can move it to done, and hopefully they have a sprint with a done increment. But also what happens quite often is that they can't move items to done during the sprint, and they are just handed over to the next sprint. So ideally, you have these small chunks of sprint backlog items that continuously move to done during the sprint, and you also release during the sprint. But that requires refinement, and that's often also a bit of a challenge for some teams. Dependencies and bottlenecks, those strongly tie in the autonomy of teams to resolve impediments. So a lot of teams need to ask permission to do stuff. So, well, they're not really a self-organizing, self-managing teams. Each time when they want to change something because they think it would be helpful for them, they need to walk over to this manager, this other team, this other department to ask permission. And this, again, can also be a cause that nothing moves to done, because they have a lot of waiting time. Powerless product owners, this might even be the number one impediment that we see in organizations. Other people in the organizations are the ones with the real mandate and authority, and they just give tasks to the product owner, and the only thing that the product owner needs to do is to hand them over to the developers. But this is not a product owner that has a product vision, the product mandate, that knows the roadmap, that can set a product goal, that can create a draft sprint goal, etc. This is just a, well, what we call a task owner. It's not really a product owner. I think I'm almost there. Let's see. Oh, one more, final one. Cherry pick agile transformations. And what we tried to illustrate or visualize with this poster is that, and it also ties into the other picture that I've shown you about agile transformations, that you can sort of like buy or order or well, just if we just buy a release train, or if we just get all these templates out there, and if we just hire enterprise coaches and a bunch of agile coaches and an expensive scaling framework, then probably all of that will make us agile. Well, in reality, each organization is unique and each organization is different. So figuring out exactly what works for your organization to really increase your agility is something that you need to figure out along the way. And it's not something that you can just resolve by using best practices that work for other organizations. And I think one of the most famous one is like the Spotify model. It worked for Spotify. Spotify itself is not even using it anymore, but still a lot of organizations are using the Spotify model for their own agile transformation. Well, it's something that, well, in complexity, each situation is different, so each organization should figure out for themselves what works in their context. But that takes time, and that's also difficult, and that's something not all organizations want to face. So these were, in quite high pace, 11 causes that we see happen in organizations that might result in zombie scrum. I'm gonna include some interaction again, because my question to you is, now that you've listened to these causes, maybe also the symptoms of zombie scrum, and if you think back about your own team, your own organization, which ones do you recognize in your team or organization? And maybe I'm going to open the chat again, just quickly share the ones that you recognize the most strongly. And I'm not going to put you on the spot, so don't worry if you think like, am I allowed to share this? And I'm going to check how we're doing for time. I think I'm on track. So let's see. Product owners, task owner, so much. Big Bang releases. Oh, nice. I found all of these. Most of them. Are there also any questions? I'm not sure, like the moderating team, if you see questions already appear, because I could maybe take time for one or two questions if there are any questions at this point in time.
Actually, there are.
Nice.
There's one question asking for your George's slides, if we can use them internally. I think it's a telecom colleague asking here for that.
If you can use these slides internally.
Sorry?
If the question was if you can use these slides internally?
Yes.
I like that one. Yes. As long as you keep the attribution like, hey, this is the Liberators illustration in place, then go wild with it. Totally fine.
Okay.
I see a lot of things appearing in the chat. So apparently there are at least a couple of things that you recognize. Was there another question?
Yeah, there's some other questions. So the first one would be, is Scrum still considered a good way to introduce Agile to companies or teams? So some say it's not Agile, or it's a source of misconception actually that leads to Agile bashing in the end.
Oh, nice. I'm gonna answer that one actually in a moment, in probably 1 or 2 minutes. But that's a good one.
Perfect.
Let me already move to that one. I think that's a
Yeah.
So, well, this is I think this is the essential question that you're looking for, like how to prevent or fix zombie scrum. Or you can also make it generic, how to make agile work in organizations and how to make teams more effective. I'm going to close the chat again. So I thought 11 is quite a nice number. So if I have 11 causes, then well, why don't I also give you hope with 11 recommendations to start improving? And this poster already ties into the question that you just raised, Sven. Because whenever I work in organizations, I rarely talk about Scrum or about Agile itself. That's also my recommendation. Try not to use any Scrum bingo or Scrum language, or especially Scrum guide language too much with people that probably are not too interested in learning more about the theoretical stuff, because it can also be distracting and annoying. And then, hey, there you are as the Scrum preacher again, preaching me about the Scrum Bible. So what I always try to do for myself is try to explain what Scrum and Agile is about, but without using any of the theoretical language, and more focus on how it impacts the role of others in the organization. And we tried to explain it in this illustration, and as you might see, it doesn't use any Scrum language. It's all about risk and assumptions and validating those assumptions. So if we just quickly read it together, in complex work, more is unknown than known. The unknown is discovered by releasing done increments early and often. With these increments, you validate assumptions and you learn what is needed and avoid the risk of spending time and money on the wrong things. As a result, you can deliver more value to your stakeholders sooner. This, in our opinion, is the essence of Scrum, but also Kanban, also extreme programming, also Agile in general. And this is what we continuously focus on. And this is also what resonates often way better with management and with stakeholders. If you talk about, hey, why shall we use an approach to minimize risk and to avoid that you're going to spend your money on the wrong things, then I rarely, well, actually, then I haven't found anyone that was like, no, let's not do that. Let's use an approach with high risk, and so that I'm probably most likely going to waste a lot of money. And then Scrum is just a framework that might help them. But let's not make Scrum too important here as well. It's just a framework. And it happens to be a framework that uses an empirical approach. But if there's a different framework that uses a different approach, well, go for it. Totally fine for me as well. Therefore, I'm also a big fan of Kanban. And also, well, unfortunately, it's not that popular anymore. But extreme programming also was quite awesome. So this, for me, this might even be the most important part of the entire presentation. And I included some links. You can just download this poster as a high resolution poster as well from my web shop, just so you know. Another one is, and this illustration ties into the illustration that I'm going to show on the slide after, is focus on identifying meaningful improvements. And we've seen so many retrospectives that focus on like, so what type of color do we need for our sticky notes? And it's like, sure, it could be important maybe for you, but it's not really what it is about. And if you are still struggling with delivering a done increment, then maybe that's the improvement that you should focus on. And to explain it a bit differently is, in a nutshell, it's all about focusing on single loop learning or double loop learning. And just a word of warning, in the upcoming slides, I'm going to introduce a bunch of models, and I'm probably going to explain it in 1 minute. Each of these models is also explained in way more detail in blog posts as we wrote. So if you want to know more about it, just send me a message and then I can share the link with you. Because single loop learning and double loop learning is quite a big concept from Christopher Aguirre. And in a nutshell, I try to describe it in the top over there as well. Single loop learning is that a team, for example, does a retrospective and they only focus on solving a problem within the existing system that they are part of. So the existing systems based on their current beliefs, the current roles that they have, the procedures that they use, and the norms that are set. So they're quite limited in the way that they are learning, and probably the improvements that they identify are not wrong. So single loop learning is not wrong, but it can be limiting. It could be that they are sort of like stuck with this tunnel vision and things are maybe improving on a minor level, but they still face these bigger impediments that, that keep appearing as well. So our recommendation is always focus on double loop learning. And with double loop learning, you really challenge the entire system that you're a part of. And you challenge sometimes deeply held belief systems that people have that might also be deeply ingrained with people. And this could be painful if you're already stuck for like 10 or 20 years in an organization. This might challenge the way you've done things for a very long time. To already make a smooth maybe connection with liberating structures. Liberating structures are a set of facilitation techniques that often help teams and organizations use double loop learning more. And one of them, for example, is myth turning. Myth turning is a liberating structures in development, and that is actually fully focused on, so what is a deeply held belief that we have as a team or as an organization that might actually not be true. So myth turning, just a quick recommendation, could be an interesting one to check out if you want to focus on double loop learning. But basically a lot of liberating structures are focused on, let's move away from narrow single loop learning and more towards double loop learning. So this is an illustration. I was in doubt, like, shall I include this one or not? Because
yeah, Eric, just one question.
Yeah.
Could you repeat what is this liberating structure called? So I didn't get it.
Good one. I'm gonna write it down. Open chat. Myth turn. It's in the chat. Myth turning. So I was in doubt, shall I include this poster, yes or no? Because it's quite a, usually I spend like 1 hour during a class explaining it, but let's see if I can do it in 1 minute-ish. Because this is essential for Scrum teams to move away from Zombie Scrum. And I think you could focus mostly on the orange line and the blue line. The orange line is all about risk, and the blue line is all about predictability. And if you take a definition of done, as an example, then if a team says, well, our work is done when it's coded and when it's tested, then you can see that the blue line of predictability is quite low. And it is low because if their definition of done stops at tested, many things can still happen afterwards, because they haven't integrated the work yet, they haven't created a releasable increment, and they haven't really released the product. So there's a lot of the predictability is low, and the risk of undone work and the risk of unforeseen impediments to show up is quite high. So Scrum requires at least a releasable done increment, because then predictability is a bit higher and the risk has decreased as well a bit. But as you can see, it's still not zero. It probably will never be zero. But therefore, it's good to challenge your team like, hey, why don't we also release during the sprint? And maybe even better nowadays, I'm sometimes adding a column as well to the right, and that's validated value. We not only release during the sprint, but we also already validate with our most important stakeholders, like, is this actually something that you're looking for? By using this approach, you continuously lower the bar of risk and expand the bar of predictability. This illustration in a nutshell is what Agile is about. And again, you can remove all the Scrum terminology. It's all about minimizing risk and increasing predictability. That's what it's about. What we've also seen from research is that teams that are highly cross-functional are way more effective, because they have less dependencies on others and because they have more skills in the team to actually create that done increment that delivers value to your stakeholders. So in order to push a team or to pull a team more to the right side of this poster, a cross-functional team is highly recommended. And also because it, like I said, it minimizes dependencies. And creating this dependency spider is one strategy that is super simple, but it's one strategy that you could use to make visible. So what are the dependencies that we are facing as a team? Just draw your team in the middle and just start plotting the dependencies and the teams and the departments that they have a relationship with and how they might be dependent on them. And actually all these yellow stickies are dependencies. So these are things you might want to remove because they can also block you in making progress as a team. Another example is make the social network of your team visible. Again, it's not rocket science. Just draw your team in the middle and just brainstorm together, like what are the people and the teams and maybe also other companies even that influence us as a team, and in what way are they influencing us, and how could we involve them in such a way that they can help us remove bottlenecks and remove impediments. Just visualize the things, visualize the social network of your team, because again that ties into this maybe a bit overwhelming illustration, but this impediment pyramid by our friend from Germany, Dominik Maximini, visualizes the type of impediments that a team might face over time. In the beginning, they might face impediments mostly about the understanding of Scrum and related to Scrum team formation, and not that much on engineering practices, adjacent processes, and the organizational process. So if a team is quite new, they mostly face impediments focused on the bottom part of this pyramid. As a team becomes more experienced, then this pyramid will flip, and then they will face less impediments focused on the understanding of Scrum, and probably more impediments that are connected to the wider organization. And again, if I go back, it's very useful to know, given the social network that we are part of as a team, who could help us resolve the impediments that we are facing. And finally, let me check. Well, not even finally. It also ties into this one, and it might become a bit difficult, but in a way also easier. We've also seen from research that teams that use their team space as a shared memory are also more effective. And if you have a physical team room, then it's quite easy. Then you can just on the walls put the sprint goal, the product goal, the roadmap, the backlog, just visualize everything so that you create sort of this shared brain, this shared memory, and also visualize this social network as a team, visualize the dependencies that you face as a team. But actually nowadays with the Mural board, the Miro board, etc., it's also quite easy. Just create one shared space as a team. And teams do have the habit to visualize the backlog, but also visualize morale, also visualize the retrospective improvements. Just try to make as many things visible as possible. And as such, you create sort of like this shared brain together with your team members, and everyone is on the same page. Let me see how much I've got left. This one, you can download the poster as well. But one strong recommendation that we often give is to help your team create a stakeholder map, because we've seen that many teams don't know who their stakeholders are, or they have the wrong stakeholders. And to be very clear, the bottom left part, those are not your stakeholders, that's audience. And audience are people that make a lot of noise, that are often present in a lot of sprint reviews, but they do not have any influence over the product, and they also do not have any stake in the product. The real stakeholders, at least, are the ones on the top right. Key customers, big investors, important users. Those are the ones that at least should be involved in your sprint reviews. Latents and defenders also have their use, but just be aware of them, that you don't confuse them with promoters. But just visualizing who your stakeholders are is already a super important step for Scrum teams or Agile teams in general. And again, you can just download this poster. You can also download a worksheet that does not contain all the explanation, but only shows you the four parts. and just put the poster on a wall or the virtual wall with your team and start a conversation. Like, given the team that we are, who do we consider as audience? Who do we consider as defenders, promoters, or latents? And based on the outcome, have a conversation. So what does this mean for us? Do we have the right people in the sprint review, or are we missing out on people that have actually a very important opinion, but it's someone that we are not listening to at this point in time? And finally, so I'm not going to explain this poster, but this poster is the Scrum framework. Just be aware that Scrum offers you a frame for self-management to work. So move away from micromanagement and trust the structure and trust the frame the Scrum framework offers you, and support your teams with self-organization and self-management within the frame the Scrum framework offers. It sounds a bit abstract, but in a nutshell, it's more like move away from micromanagement and focus on the top part. That's the comic I already explained, and focus on the bottom part, the values and the commitments and empiricism. And if you focus on the top and the middle part, then you'll see that, the top and the bottom part, then you'll see that the middle part, the mechanics of the Scrum framework, also will go way smoother. So these were 11 recommendations. Again, I went quite fast. I'm just going to check my time. I'm doing quite well time-wise. So I can hit the pause button again and move one step back and maybe take 5 minutes for answering some questions, if there are any questions.
Yes, they are. Fantastic. So just to let everyone know, we copied the questions which popped up in the chat to the Slido. Nice. So we have one source of questions, and there you can also rate the questions which are already been raised. So let me read out the most rated ones. So Barry, do you know a liberating structure to conduct a retro with a team and stakeholders that allows for both an internal and external view on the team? So to say a 360-degree retro.
Yeah, what comes to mind immediately is, I'm just typing it in, a huge fishbowl is perfectly suited. So what you could do is a bunch of stakeholders in the middle, and the team members or members of multiple teams around the stakeholders, and then the stakeholders can share their experience with the product that the team has built so far. You can also flip it, and then you put some representatives of the team in the middle, and then the stakeholders around them, and then the team members can share their experience building the product so far. And then each time the outer circle can sort of like throw in questions that they have for the stakeholders or the team members in the middle to the fish, so to say, and then they can again share the experience. So huge fishbowl is a liberating structure that I use quite often. It works quite well. Any other questions? I can recommend way more liberating structures, but also want to give space for maybe some other questions.
Yeah, another question would be, how can we as Scrum Masters bring management closer to the teams?
That's a good question. I'm going to answer that in a moment, because after this short time box of answering some questions or pausing questions, I'm going to explain the scientific research that Chris and I have been doing, and that ties in strongly into management support. So it's easier for me to explain how management can support the teams at that moment in time, then it has the right context. So I'm going to answer that one a bit later.
Okay.
Then maybe another one. If you read Scrum Masters job postings occasionally, what is the most frequent, stubborn, or horrible anti-pattern about Scrum Masters you notice there?
That's a very good one. And by the way, I just see a question like, hey, Barry, Johannes Schartau, is that the Johannes you've mentioned at the beginning of your talk? Yes, that's him. That was easy. He's from Holisticon, just so you know. Anti-pattern, that Scrum Masters only should be focused on their team. And that they have agile coaches for the surroundings of the team, and that they have enterprise or give it a fancy name coaches for the wider organization. And that's, well, not true. And I'm not against Scrum Masters or pro Agile coaches or against Agile coaches, pro Scrum Masters. It's not about Scrum, Agile coaching or enterprise coaching at all. What I strongly believe is that the people doing the work are in the best position to feel the needs of the people doing the work and also to spark change in the wider organization, because they on daily basis work together with developers, product owners, stakeholders, hopefully as well. So people doing the work should be put in a position to create an environment where they can be successful. If you use Scrum, Scrum Masters happen to be the people or the persons that are responsible for sparking that change in a wider organization. And then totally fine if you have coaches, consultants, managers, etc., supporting the teams. But like I said, all of them should be supporting the teams. And in quite a lot of organizations, you see that the teams are at the bottom of the hierarchy and they work for others in the organization. And that's also something that trickles in many of the conversations and the mindset that they have, that the team should follow, for example, the hierarchy, and they are at the bottom of the hierarchy of the ladder. While for me, the teams are actually building the real value for many organizations. They are the ones building products that an organization hopes to get value from and also earn money with. So they should, for me, the team should be on the top of the hierarchy, and everyone in the organization should support those teams. But that's a totally different mindset. And it already starts with the expectation that the Scrum Master should just focus on the team, do fun retrospectives, and facilitate the events. Well, that's not really what the role is about. So I would say that's my top one anti-pattern that I recognize. So given the time, I'm also checking the time on my side. I'm going to move over to another part in the presentation, and then I'm going to hit the pause button again. I'm just going to close the chat for a moment. So a different way to start improving the way you use Agile or Scrum is with a scientifically validated survey. It's a product that Chris and I built the past years. I'm not going to make it a sales pitch, so don't worry about it. I'm just going to explain how it could maybe benefit you as a team, and also mostly to explain the scientific model that's behind it. And you can just use it right now as well. We also have a free version that you can use. So Christian Verwijs and Daniel Russo, they wrote an academic paper. You can find the link over there, and it's called A Theory on Scrum Team Effectiveness. And the scientific model is shown in the illustration over there. I'm going to explain a simplified version in a moment. The scientific paper is what it says it is. It's a scientific paper, and I'm not a scientist, so for me it's like impossible to understand and to read. So mostly for me, but it also proves to be useful for some others. Chris also wrote a non-technical version of the paper, and that's the second bullet, the blog post, what makes Scrum Team effective. He basically shares the conclusions in that blog post in normal human language. Well, for me at least. This is the model, and a bit of background. Chris and Daniel approached about 12 organizations a couple of years ago to interview them and to get a starting point on, hey, what is it that makes your teams effective? Based on that, a first version of the model was created, and they used that model to plot it on 2,000 other teams and to see, like, does this model also make sense in the wider context? They made some changes, and eventually, based on the results of all those teams and all the input that all those teams gave, this model was created. And by now, I think about 10,000 teams, 11,000 teams have used the survey, and the model still seems to be quite solid. So this is a model that we've developed based on scientific research on factors that determine Agile team effectiveness. It used to be Scrum team effectiveness, but we've also done some research like, hey, if we move away all the Scrum terminology and if we do another research, does it still make sense? And the good news is that it does. But in the Agile model that you're looking at, things are more agnostic. So we speak about shared goals and feedback gathering and not about sprint goals or the sprint review. I'm going to try to explain this model in 1 or 2 minutes, and it's easiest to read from right to left. Team effectiveness, that could be considered the end goal. And team effectiveness has 2 sub-factors, team morale and stakeholder happiness. Team morale, meaning in this very simplified way, do we have happy team members? And stakeholder happiness, meaning are our stakeholders satisfied with the value that our teams are delivering? I do want to emphasize that team morale is way more, so I'm actually going to contradict myself, but it's way more than happiness only. And if you have a strong purpose, if you have a strong goal that you want to achieve as a team, then it could be that not everyone is fully happy every day, but they still have high morale because they all believe in the need and the value of achieving that goal. So morale is more than happiness only. Happiness is a part of team morale. I think we should actually change stakeholder happiness into stakeholder morale as well. That might make sense in my explanation. So team effectiveness, you could say that's the end goal. And 2 large factors influence team effectiveness strongly, and that's stakeholder concern and responsiveness. Stakeholder concern meaning, do we understand who our stakeholders are? And do we also know what value they need? And what goals we need to set in order to achieve that value? A different way of looking at stakeholder concern is that there is a shared feeling of product ownership. So we've seen that teams that are most effective, in those teams, there is a shared feeling of, there is a strong feeling of shared product ownership. So it's not only the product owner that collaborates with the stakeholders, and it's not only the product owner that knows the roadmap. Developers also have a direct connection with their stakeholders. And developers also know what the roadmap looks like, what the product vision is, what the release planning looks like, etc. So shared product ownership is an essential part of stakeholder concern. Now, stakeholder concern only becomes meaningful if you're also responsive, meaning things that you learn by collaborating with your stakeholders, those are things that the team has the responsiveness for to actually do something with it. So this means inspect and adapt. And responsiveness has as sub-factors release frequency, release automation, and refinement, because all those smaller parts strongly influence the responsive capabilities of a team. You could even say that Agile is all about stakeholder concern and responsiveness. And in order to make stakeholder concern and responsiveness work, you need a climate of continuous improvement. And that's the left part of the poster. And continuous improvements consist of the quality of retrospectives, the way they measure their progress, if there's an environment of high trust and psychological safety, if the team can navigate conflict in a healthy way. That's roughly what continuous improvement is about. And also, does the team have the autonomy to actually act on the things that they learn while having these high quality retrospectives? Can they create an environment and choose a way of working that they think, hey, this would suit our way of working? For example, can they have the freedom to say, hey, we want to use Kanban as an approach and not Scrum, because we think that makes more sense given the work that we do? Or are they stuck in an organization where everyone must use Scrum? Or maybe they want to create their own way of working because they think that is more suitable for them. Now, finally, what we've seen, and that's maybe even the most essential factor of all, we've seen purely based on raw data and also just our own experience that all these things will only be used successful if the right support from management is available. Without management support, without support from leadership, it's very difficult to succeed with Agile in your organization. Mostly because many of the, if you still remember the impediment pyramid that I've shown, many of the more difficult impediments are not impediments that are happening within the team, but they are happening in the environment of the team. And impediments that are more like happening in the surroundings of the team often need support from management in order to help them resolve. So we've seen that management support really is what makes an Agile transformation, what breaks an Agile transformation. And therefore, product owners, Scrum Masters, coaches should really always closely collaborate with middle management and also with higher management in the organization. And really also explain to them like what's in it for them. Why should they spend their time resolving impediments? And again, it ties back into what I've explained earlier. Try to move away from this Scrum language bingo or this Scrum guide language and explain in normal human language why it matters to remove certain impediments. That's essential. Now, roughly what we do with the survey, I'm actually going to move forward a bit, is we make visible what's going on team level. So one team can take the survey, just a free survey. They can take the survey and make visible what's going on team level. If you have more than one team and organization, then you can also make visible what's going on multi-team level and see the aggregated results of the teams. So in this case, you can see that for continuous improvement, the blue bars are the results of 4 teams in our tool. But if you have like 50 teams, then you would see a drill down of the results of 50 teams. It's a lot of transparency. I'm aware of that. And the third level is organizational level. You could create clusters of value streams or clusters or groups of teams and then see the results per value stream as well. The big advantage is that you can also see one area where teams are facing impediments and where they need support. And this gives you the opportunity to offer support where needed. Now you might see a yellow bar and can you see it over here? That's a shame, it's actually not visible. Well, the yellow bar that's visible is stakeholders. So a team can also invite the stakeholders and ask the stakeholders for their opinion as well, because a team can be super happy with themselves. But if the stakeholders are not satisfied with the value and the release frequency, then yeah, then there's not really reason to be super happy with yourself. So stakeholders get a super short survey focused on how satisfied are you with the value, the quality, the release frequency, etc. of this team. And team members can also invite their managers and their leaders and their coaches in their organization. And they get a survey not with questions like, hey, what do you think of this team? But managers get questions like, what are you as a manager doing to create an environment for more autonomy for teams? What are you as a manager doing to support these teams with continuous improvement, etc. So managers get more like introspective questions. And then it becomes very clear, like in an organization, is there a gap between management support, between the support managers are providing and the support the team members think they get from management. And then you might have an interesting starting point for a conversation. Let me just check the time. 7 minutes left. So what is left in the presentation? But I'm going to make this a maybe just a homework exercise for yourselves. I'm just quickly going to explain it to you. Is eco-cycle planning. It's one of my favorite liberating structures. So after this session, maybe this weekend, then you have maybe a lot of time available. Draw an eco-cycle. This eco-cycle, just print the eco-cycle. And one by one, answer these statements like, given the model that I've explained, the model with all these factors, finish these sentences with your team in mind. A factor my team is unaware of or hasn't started using is ... Could be team morale, could be sprint retrospectives. A factor my team recently started using or investing time in is, etc. Just read these sentences, and eventually what the result will be is that you will plot the factors of the model on this eco-cycle planning, and you can see where you need to start improving. It's going to make sense. And I'm going to share I think I'm going to share a quick workshop template as well after presentation with a more step-by-step explanation, but I also want to give some time for some questions. A couple of things that I want to share super quickly. And this presentation will also be shared afterwards with you. These are some links in order you want to learn more. And this is a request for help. And it's totally not commercial. We're not going to make any money with this, but Chris, Daniel Russo, and Ornila have started a new scientific research. We're going to share the results with the community as always. So our only question is, if you are part of a team, it would be awesome if you could just take 10 minutes and complete the survey, because then we have more data, and that's data that's supporting us in doing research in the formation phase of new teams. So I'm going to share the presentation, then you can just read the research on your own pace as well. But it would be super helpful if you could do this survey, because it helps us again in our scientific research. And as always, we'll share the results of the research publicly as well. So I'm gonna stop talking because I think we've got 5 minutes left. So are there
Fantastic.
any questions?
Thank you very so much so far. Yes, there are questions.
Yeah.
The most voted one is, how can you as a Scrum Master support a powerless PO?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think explaining the role of the Scrum Master is super simple. A Scrum Master each day should only ask his or herself at the start of the day, what is it that I need to make visible today? How am I gonna make inspection happen, and how can I trigger adaptation? And if you have a powerless product owner, then you could just ask like, hey, I'm noticing that my product owner doesn't have any mandate. How can I make visible that my product owner doesn't have any mandate? How can I make visible that how it impacts the team and why it matters? And how can I start sparking change and removing it and removing those impediments? And to make it a bit more specific, we have an exercise which is called Management in Scrum. With that exercise, we first plot the responsibilities of all the roles in a Scrum team. Like, these are the responsibilities of a Scrum Master, of a developer, of a product owner. We create, step one is create a picture of professional Scrum. Step two is mark the cards that are managed differently in your organization. And quite often the product owner role gets a lot of dots because the product owner role is often not managed as it's supposed to be. And then start a conversation, how is each of these dots impacting the empirical process for Scrum? So for example, if your product owner is not responsible for the roadmap, or if your product owner is not responsible for the product budget, then start a conversation like, okay, given the fact that the product owner isn't responsible for the product budget, how does it impact the empirical process of Scrum? How does it impact the collaboration with the developers? And then you can start a conversation like, well, as a result, we face a lot of dependencies. As a result of that, we cannot release that early and often because we need to ask permission from others, from other teams. So step one, make it visible. Step two, inspect it together. Step three, spark change and start improving. I'm not sure if that was helpful, but that would be my answer. I'm going to stop sharing actually, so that I actually also see some people. That would be nice. Well, some people.
Tech mods will arrange that, I guess. There is much voting happening still in the questions, so maybe we do one or two more. Question: is it also a zombie for you when supervisors want to participate in Scrum events? For example, daily planning retro, to get to know their employees better?
No, not necessarily, as long as like for the right motivation. If it's like, I don't know, I would not make it a surprise visit. So I would say, well, maybe do some announcements up front and then maybe also share your motivation. But if it's like for the right motivation and they just want to learn what impediments they are facing and if they can help out resolving it, I would say awesome. If it's like checking if they can put some pressure on the team to do more work, then it might not be such a smart idea. But no, I would say perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you. I have one more.
Yeah.
Your proposed solution focus a lot on the execution and product delivery part. What
Yeah.
about moving from outputs to outcomes away from shit in, shit out?
And what's the question? Maybe the person itself can maybe elaborate, or I'm not sure what the question is. Is the question like how to move away from outcome, from output to outcome, or?
Yeah, from output to outcomes. I think that is the isn't that the I think the question is in there to be more outcome focused. Isn't that the most important thing, basically, right?
Yes, it is. That's the essential part. Yeah, because like you can do a lot, you can be super busy and super proud and happy with how much work you produce as a team, but if eventually like the people that you are doing the work for are not happy with the work that you do, then what's the meaning? And I rather maybe the best days that Chris and I have if when we decide not to do a large chunk of work, then we can actually stop working for the rest of the day, because then sometimes we already produced a lot of value by not doing some work because we've learned that it actually would be time wasted. So therefore, we also work closely with our stakeholders for the product that we're developing, and sometimes they give us feedback, and then we just show our product backlog, and we just share with them, hey, this is our intention. We have the ambition to start working on these features, but before we start, does it still make sense? Would this still make you happy? Would this improve your work? And sometimes the answer is no, and then we can just archive the feature, and we saved a lot of time and money as well. But that's essentially focusing on outcome. And if you don't have that close collaboration with your stakeholders, the pitfall might be that you would have built that feature and you would have released it, and then in production you discover like, why is no one using that feature? And you've wasted a lot of time and money.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Barry. We do now reach 10:01. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and this excellent keynote.
It was quite a roller coaster ride, so I hope it was not too fast. I'll share a version of the latest version of the presentation with I think Torsten, I guess. And if you, like I said, if you have any questions, always feel free to send me a message. No problem at all.